Hey everybody, my name is Andrew Bordeaux, and I am here to talk about practical strategies for leveraging interprofessional assistive technology resources. So if that's what you're here to learn about, then I'm ready to get started. Let me just move out of the way real quick. That's a little bit better. So a bit about me. I'm a speech-language pathologist. I founded a private practice, MKE SLP, in January of 2020, which admittedly, this has been a challenging year to start up. Um, I've experienced augmentative and alternative communication and assistive technology service delivery from many different avenues. So I've been a clinician in a medical clinic, at the Communication Aids and Systems Clinic, as well as Autism and Developmental Disabilities clinics at the Weisman Center at the University of Wisconsin. And while there, we were recipients of the McLean Yoder Award for Professional Excellence, myself as well as the CASC team. I've moved between Wisconsin and North Carolina at least 4 times in about a decade. And that's given me the opportunity to work at places. I was a graduate assistant at the Center for Literacy and Disability Studies. I went to graduate school at UNC Chapel Hill, where I did my first year of leadership education in neurodevelopmental and related disabilities, LEND, which is a mouthful. And then I did my second year actually while at the Weisman Center, completing my clinical fellowship. Um, I moved back there again to actually be an AAC specialist in a rural slash military slash urban school district. So moving from Madison, Wisconsin to that climate, it was definitely an adjustment, and it was a great one because you get to see service delivery of assistive technology in a whole new world, a whole new light. And while there, I was a member of the inaugural North Carolina Assistive Technology Advisory Council. And then I also completed training with the North Carolina AAC and Assistive Technology Interdisciplinary Assessment Team Initiative, which involved getting a whole bunch of folks together, building up an awesome, excellent team in order to provide those AAC and assistive tech services to the school district, the whole county. I was also a national AAC consultant for a speech generating device company. And while doing that, which I kind of viewed as that in between, so you've seen the medical side, you've seen the school education side, this provided a whole new aspect. So you get to work with people's lives in their offices in all these different ways. And I did that from basically Portland, Oregon over to Portland, Maine, and everywhere in between. And that all led right up to where I'm at right now. So for the next few slides, I'm going to turn off the camera and I will be talking for a while. And I hope that you tune in and enjoy the presentation. So thanks for being with us. If you want to learn more about me, there's some contact information. You can visit the website at MKE SLP.com or my LinkedIn page. And I would love to connect with all of you. All right, so enjoy the presentation and thank you. So there are some financial disclosures and information that we should cover. So I am the owner, speech language pathologist with an AAC specialist with the private practice MKE SLP, which is based out of southeastern Wisconsin. And MKE SLP is an advertising affiliate with Amazon.com and Adobe. However, there are no links to those to the affiliate websites in this presentation. Non-financial relationships. I am a member of the following organizations: the American Speech Language Hearing Association, the United States AAC Association, the Germantown, Wisconsin Chamber of Commerce, and I'm the chair of the Wisconsin Speech Language Pathology and Audiology Membership Committee. I do have an additional disclaimer that throughout the presentation I am going to be highlighting various products, services, companies, but I don't have any financial relationships other than the ones mentioned above. Due to the significant scope of technology and everything that's available, it's just not possible to acknowledge everybody, and I don't purposely mean to exclude anybody throughout this presentation. Everything that gets referenced is just used to emphasize and illustrate the importance of incorporating interprofessional strategies in the context of all the technology and assistive technology. So strategies and concepts highlighted throughout the presentation will, in many cases, be universally transferable across assistive technology and accessibility providers. Expected learner outcomes. We're going to apply components of the TriFocus framework and participation model to assistive technology decision-making, define interprofessional competencies, identify interprofessional team members, combine those strategies to use assistive technology for advocacy, and learn educational resources for leadership, accessibility, and interprofessional skills. Some of the acronyms that you will see pop up regularly throughout this presentation. The first one is IPC, which stands for Interprofessional Collaborative Practice. It may also pop up as IPCP in reference to several research articles. I will never refer to it as ICP because the 8-year-old in me just can't handle it. IPE stands for Interprofessional Education. ASHA, the American Speech Language Hearing Association. MCH, Maternal and Child Health Bureau. AUCD, the Association of University Centers on Disabilities. AAC, of course, is Augmentative and Alternative Communication, and AT, Assistive Technology. So, the presentation overview. This presentation teaches strategies, resources, and next steps for utilizing interprofessional teams and components of the TriFocus framework and participation model to leverage community voices in directly influencing the assistive technology marketplace by adapting support for individuals, communication networks, and overall environments. So there are a few essential ideas to unpack from this very wordy paragraph. And when I was reading this out loud to myself, this is the first thing I thought of was, why waste time, say lot word, when few word do trick, for those of you who are familiar with The Office. So the presentation overview, I'm going to take that last paragraph and break it down into these following parts. Interprofessional Collaborative Practice, IPC. So we'll define it, identify team members, and learn how it applies to assistive technology teams. The TriFocus framework and participation model, we'll learn about the key focal points and 5 primary strategies, and the participation inventory and barriers. Developing new skills and building resource libraries. So we're going to learn strategies to make connections and influence assistive technology, how to collect free resources, provide better support and intervention, and using these resources with IPC, the TriFocus framework, and the participation model. Hey everyone, it's me again. And now we're going to learn more about interprofessional collaborative practice. So most organizations define interprofessional collaborative practice using a standard definition set by the World Health Organization. And that definition is when 2 or more professions learn about, from, and with each other to enable effective collaboration and improve health outcomes. The American Speech Language Hearing Association has a webinar that's available for free on YouTube titled The Why, What, and How of Interprofessional Collaboration. One of the quotes from this video is, "The loop never ends, so you are constantly learning from, with, and about the professionals on your team to continuously engage in high-quality collaborative practice." Interprofessional education and practice is a significant focal point across many professional organizations and training programs, including most professional healthcare organizations. It's not a new concept. It has been advocated for more than 40 years by the Institute of Medicine. So even leadership training programs, for example, the Maternal and Child Health Bureau, in 2018, they updated leadership competencies to include the term interprofessional to all mentions of interdisciplinary. They did this to indicate a broader understanding of the variety of professionals, MCH populations, family and self-advocate leaders, and community partners included in such teams. And the maternal and child health leadership competencies include the area of self, so thinking that the leadership process begins with the focus on self, where leadership is directed at one's own learning through readings, instruction, reflection, and planned and serendipitous experiences. So how are you improving yourself? Whether it's your knowledge of assistive technology as a user, or if it's how to empower yourself in order to be a leader on your team. The next sphere is others, so leadership in the next sphere extends to coworkers, colleagues, trainees, fellow students, and patients. What are the behavior and attitudes and communication methods that you have with those folks? And then it extends to the wider community. So leadership can extend and have a broader impact on entire organizations, systems, and even general modes of practice. So when we're thinking about interprofessional education and practice, we're looking at all these different parts and components within oneself, and also how to apply it to the folks that we're working with. So interprofessionalism and the 4 A's. The 4 A's being assistive technology, AAC, accessibility, and advocacy. So it's important to stress that interprofessional collaboration is for all learners and abilities. You don't need a severity level in order to establish an interprofessional team. It's important to extend interprofessional collaborative teams beyond that self-sphere. So again, we're looking out at others and into the wider community. So are any assistive technology companies, community resources, or other organizations part of your team? So reps for companies, vendors, resources, whole bunch of websites, Twitter even, libraries. These are all great resources in order to extend your team beyond the self sphere. Just a reminder too that everyone does have a stake in supporting folks with disabilities. So you can always include advocacy with regards to basic economics. So doesn't it make sense to have everybody working, to have everything accessible? There's a whole bunch of methods that we're going to outline in this presentation that you can apply to that. And we always need to be including that wider community environment in all interprofessional planning and goals. Always, always. What are the core competencies of interprofessional collaboration? So there's 4 main categories, and these core competencies are included in the presentation handout. The first area includes values and ethics, and there's teams and teamwork, roles and responsibilities, and interprofessional communication. So these 4 areas all have sub-competencies, averaging about 10 or so, in order to help you demonstrate proficiency in those areas. The first category, values and ethics. So this is how you're working with individuals of other professions to maintain a climate of mutual respect and shared values. So, for example, how do you demonstrate respect for the members of your interprofessional team? Does your team provide validation for one another? Is everyone on your team treated with mutual respect, including the client and the family? Roles and responsibilities. So how you understand your role on the team, as well as the role of other professions, family members, and individuals to provide appropriate health care. Do you know your professional scope of practice? If you are a client or a family member, do you know your role and responsibility on the team? Do you have a role and responsibility on the team? How are these roles and the responsibilities, how are they established, updated, and even discussed with your team? For interprofessional communication, that you openly, regularly, and actively communicate with other team members and individuals from other fields in a responsive and responsible manner. So do you purposefully plan and personalize statements to portray open and clear ideals? If not, you can do things like take a business writing course through a local library or chamber of commerce. How are your nonverbal communication cues perceived by your IPC team? Do you use too much professional jargon so that other members may not fully understand it? And if you're on a team, remember, it's always okay to stop and ask someone what a term means. And if you're not able to in the moment, make sure to make a note and communicate it to that team member in the future. You're probably not the only person with that question. And that's where those professional acronyms, ASHA, IPC, WHO, they can really throw somebody for a loop if not everybody is on that same thing. So how are you communicating those things? And your team's in teamwork. So you plan, deliver, and evaluate health programs and patient-centered care. You apply these team dynamics to policies that are safe, timely, efficient, and effective. For example, how frequently does your team reevaluate these needs? Are administrators, community members, and resources, and even larger networks part of your team? Do you know who or how to contact someone at the Apple Store if a team member is experiencing challenges with an iDevice? Do you have community partners where you and or client feel comfortable practicing those assistive technology skills outside of the therapy room or house? So how is this all established? In a few slides, we'll talk about the tri-focus framework and participation models, which we will use to support in answering these questions, and then identifying appropriate supports to maximize the effectiveness of our IPC teams. All right, what's in a name? So interprofessional collaborative practice is not a new term, as mentioned before, but it's gaining more and more recognition, and it's starting to be used more frequently. So let's compare that to perhaps other service delivery methods that you might have heard about. So transdisciplinary, interdisciplinary, and multidisciplinary. Multidisciplinary is when professionals work more independently, and it's usually in parallel or sequential order to address client care. So if I see a client, I write down some goals, maybe a diagnosis, it goes on to somebody else, they take that information, and then they, do their own assessments, and maybe our treatments, we're still both trying to help the client, but it's not really a goal that we both worked on together. Whereas in interdisciplinary, you have those multidisciplinary aspects, but there's also the coordination piece that happens. So with interdisciplinary care, we're working on these goals together. We're communicating with other professions, and we're trying to achieve the same outcomes and helping each other get there. So this is if I were to be working with a psychologist, that we can both recognize a behavior pattern, we talk about it, we coordinate care, and then provide treatment. With transdisciplinary, this is where boundaries actually sort of dissolve between professions. And assistive technology is one of those fields where you actually see transdisciplinary services quite a bit. So in transdisciplinary services, I might have spent a lot of time working with an occupational therapist. So I've learned a lot about positioning, mounts, all those kinds of things that normally I would just be focused on a communication device as a speech-language pathologist. But all these other aspects are very important to that. And I've learned enough from colleagues, from attending seminars and all those different all those different learning resources, that now I can actually provide those services. With transdisciplinary care, I could do all that. I'm taking that role on, and it does start to focus on the problems as part of the broader systems approach. However, it's not really interprofessional. I'm not really working with that occupational therapist to create these collaborative goals. So now we're at the level of interprofessional care. The following are concepts, that you might see in these other areas, but they are absolutely required for true interprofessional collaboration. So in interprofessional care, the patient or family, they're part of the team. In fact, a big part of the team. There's clear roles for everybody on your team. There's shared responsibility and accountability. So if somebody's not meeting a goal, that the whole team's getting together, figuring out what's going on with that, taking the responsibility for it, and then developing a plan. It's non-hierarchical and non-territorial. So non-hierarchical being that the physician, the speech-language pathologist, audiologist, client, We're all on that same level, all right? There's a mutual respect piece, and it's non-territorial. So even though I'm a speech language pathologist, I know communication and language development. If the occupational therapist on the team were to say, you know, maybe we should try this language structure on this device because this is what I'm seeing, that you respect that. You step back and you say, you know, that makes sense. Let's look at it. Let's make a plan for it. There's transparency. So we all know what one another's doing on the team. We're open, we're communicating, and we're keeping in touch on that. It's that continuous, fluid, integrated communication piece that really separates interprofessional collaborative care from all these other areas. There's that dynamic evaluation and service provision piece too. And this is ongoing. So it's ongoing professional development. And also, you know, the patient, the family, they're also attending these. They're also continually learning. They're part of that evaluation process. It transcends, you know, our knowledge and skills to achieve a more synergistic, collaborative, integrated, team-based communication and care. And again, all of this results in better health outcomes. In thinking about interprofessional teams, I want to share this next slide. It's sort of a personal level, just to help provide more of an idea of what your teams can look like. Okay. So these are just some things about me, Andrew. I'm a speech language pathologist. I have speech language pathology knowledge and skills, and that's my role. That's my responsibility. And other areas on a team, you know, I have a hidden disability, so I have attention deficit disorder. So that's something that's not going to be readily apparent to folks on my interprofessional teams, okay? And what that could mean is if somebody's trying to communicate with me in a certain way, it might not be the best way for me, and I might forget something. So when you're thinking about your other team members, is there something going on where, you know, how do you figure out how to communicate with other folks? So the Enfp on the Myers-Briggs, it stands for extroversion, intuition, feeling, perceiving. So that's just my typical sort of learning and leadership style when I'm on a team. How does that conflict with other folks on that interprofessional team? Am I overstepping on people? How am I showing my values with that? And that's where that idealist component comes in. So if my values are in that sort of realm, how am I interacting with other people? I have a KVA learning preference, which means kinesthetic, visual, auditory. So I learn by doing. Next is visual, and then hearing. So auditory. So if you say something to me in passing, I might not remember it, but if we get a chance to sit down and look at something or do something together, I will probably remember that for a long time. My top 5 strengths in that too. So I'm aware of where those strengths, you know, you can see me lifting the weights up there, and then areas that I need to work on in order to be a strong team member on those teams. And, you know, I'm sharing this because I want everybody to be aware that there are these different areas and different strengths that everybody brings, and there are areas that you need to take a look at on yourself, so that you know how to support other folks and bring those things forward. And I'm not saying you need to divulge, you know, like all your medical information and history, but just those things that are going to be relevant in order to maximize healthcare outcomes. Okay? And when you're looking at that, we go into our identifying your key team members. And I want you to take a couple moments to reflect on your interprofessional teams that you have now. And if you don't have an interprofessional team, I want you to visualize what that might look like. So how do you meet with your team? And close your eyes if you need to, but what does it look like to you? Could you readily explain it to an unfamiliar person? How do you engage in open, regular, and active communication with those individuals? So are you leaving post-it notes, you know, on their work computer, on their door? Are you text messaging? Are you emailing? If you are an assistive technology professional, do you include your clients and their families on your team? If you are a person who uses assistive technology or a family member or advocate, do you see yourself as a key member of that team? When you close your eyes and visualize your team, are you sitting at the table with everybody? So if yes, that's awesome. And I want you to think about, how do you explain your individual responsibility on that team? How do you communicate with all team members? Do you communicate the same with each person? And what are your values? Are they the same values shared by your team members? And if you don't see yourself as a key team member, why not? And there'll be more ideas about this as we keep going through this presentation, but just keep that in the back of your mind. This slide shows a preview of different resources for interprofessional collaboration and education. There's a YouTube video, a playlist. I put that one together, so you can go to that link and check that out. I think there's about 35, 36 videos right now, and those are all available for free. The American Speech Language Hearing Association has a great practice portal on this, and speech language pathologists, you can earn 0.2 ASHA CEUs, which are available for free through December 22nd of this year. For other folks, you might need to check with your professional organization if this can count as your maintenance hours. The National Center for Interprofessional Practice and Education, this is considered to be one of the go-to resources on interprofessional collaborative practice. And then there are many more resources put together in the handouts for this presentation. All right, and now on to the participation model. Here's a scenario that I want you to consider as we're going through the next few slides on the participation model. I urgently need to communicate with a family member who lives in another state who does not reply to emails. I'm not able to use the phone and not sure this family member even has a phone. All the emails I have been sending are getting returned. It seems this family member really only uses Facebook to communicate. I've never used Facebook because it was too cumbersome to navigate using two switch scanning methods, which is my primary means of accessing my computer. Now, I know that members of my interprofessional collaborative practice team use Facebook to communicate with their family members in other states. I currently use a Mac, but I am looking for new assistive technology and considering Grid 3 software on a Microsoft Surface running on the Windows operating system. So the participation model. When you're looking at the participation model, it provides a systemic and evidence-based approach for conducting AAC assessments. And I want you to think about that AAC assessments and how it applies to assistive technology assessments, and designing interventions based on the functional participation requirements of peers without disabilities of the same chronological age as the person who may communicate through AAC or as the person who may use assistive technology. This model is similar to the Human Activity Assistive Technology model that was developed in 2002. And that model consists of 4 different parts, which is activity, context, the human. The human's the intrinsic enabler. So what is it in the person themselves that they can do that motivates them to go? The assistive technologies, and that's the extrinsic enabler. So what is it about the assistive technology that allows that person to accomplish something? There are basic underlying principles to the participation model. So some of those are multi-phase assessment. There's an importance of consensus building, that's an interprofessional team work. Ongoing reevaluation and communication. Forward thinking, so we're not just thinking about today, we're thinking about the future. And that's something you need your teams to do. And you're working towards a goal of full participation. So what does this model look like? You need to assess needs and participation barriers. There's opportunity barriers, so that might look like politics, for example. Are there policies that are getting in the way? There's access barriers, so thinking at that intrinsic enabler level. So what is my motivation to use a certain piece of technology? We want to plan strategies for today and tomorrow. Then we provide instruction to the person who uses the assistive technology, or AAC, as well as the folks around them. And then it's time to reevaluate everything. So is this working? Is it not working? And, if things are not working, we're going right back up to the top and doing this again to figure out why. Breaking this down, those opportunity barriers, so again, policies that we could be looking at, practice. So are other people of your interprofessional teams practicing this? There is facilitator skill level. So how skilled are the people on that team in this area? Facilitator knowledge. So as a speech language pathologist, do I know everything that's available? And even just general attitudes. So do I go into this with an attitude of, a person can't do this, it's too complicated? With access barriers, you're looking at things like you need to assess the current skills of an individual, come to an understanding, a collective understanding of the potential natural ability. What's the potential for environmental adaptations to help that individual out? And all those kind of come together, and you're looking at the potential to use those assistive technology AAC systems. Moving on to the Tri-Focus Framework. The Tri-Focus Framework was first proposed in 1997, and the basis of the 2017 article by Bruce and Bashinsky titled The Tri-Focus Framework and Interprofessional Collaborative Practice in Severe Disabilities. The framework supported the field to move beyond assessment and intervention focused on just the individual with severe disability, and to consider the impact of the environment and communication partners. It is based on 3 focal points and 5 primary strategies which support those focal points. So as we're going through this, think about, what do communication partners look like nowadays? How and to whom do you and your members on your IPC team communicate? In a technology-based society, how frequently do we need to engage unfamiliar communication and or interaction partners in order to fully participate across all environments? The Tri-Focus Framework has 3 focal points and 5 primary strategies. The 3 focal points include the learner, the communication partner, which also I expand out to the interaction partner, and the environment. And when we say environment, we're not talking about a nice hike through the woods. We're talking about, is it a home office? Is it a school classroom? Is it a digital online environment? And it can also be outside in the woods too, why not? Then there's the 5 primary strategies to support those, and these are all intertwined. So you have enhancing partner sensitivity. So what are we doing to sort of train everyone else around us? So there's that training component. Utilizing routines. How are you building in your plans into a daily routine? Increasing communication opportunities. So that goes back to those opportunity barriers that we've already identified. Modifying the environment. Again, so are there things that we can put in place within an office space to promote full participation? And then there's augmenting input. So per the article, augmenting input is a receptive strategy that involves pairing the communication partner's speech with other forms to enhance the comprehension of learners with severe disabilities. To take this a little more broadly, it's describing what you're doing while you're teaching, modeling. So we can model things in more of a general basis. So if somebody needs to use Facebook for communication and doesn't know how, that we can augment their input. We show them as we're going through how we're doing this. It should come as no surprise that the article titled The Tri-Focus Framework and Interprofessional Collaborative Practice in Severe Disabilities emphasizes the importance of interprofessional collaboration. So the authors concluded that effective IPC in communication intervention considers the learner's characteristics, the knowledge and skills required of communication partners, and effective environmental arrangements to support communication. And again, the communication part, think about assistive technology. And the graphic there is, this sounds familiar. And that should, those three ideas there. The learner, the knowledge and skills of communication partners or others. So you have the self, others, wider community. And these themes do keep reappearing because it's a very important thing to take into consideration as we're trying to figure out the best supports for every member of our interprofessional teams. And then how we can use those supports to advocate for future change and for more supports. And here, we'll break this down even a little bit more. So the similarities to interprofessional training and leadership skills. So as we talked about the self, others, wider community, here's our connections. So you have the learner, you have self, you have the interaction partner, you have others, you have the environment, and the wider community. All right, we have covered quite a bit so far, including interprofessional collaborative practice and team building, the participation model, and the tri-focus framework. So for next step, I'm going to ask some questions. I'm not going to provide the answers onto these. I just want you to take a second to write them down yourself, take a step back, and review and think about them. So an interprofessional collaborative team is comprised of what type of members? Who are those members? What are the goals? What are the core competencies? Hint, values and ethics are one of them. The participation model was developed by, and it's similar to which other model for assistive technology? Just remember HAT. The participation model is a systematic design to assess which two kinds of barriers. What are the three focal points of the tri-focus framework? And what are the 5 primary strategies? And finally, what is a speech-language pathologist's favorite day of the week? And that one is Chatter Day. All right, so the next question is, but what does it all mean and why is it important? Aren't these frameworks developed for communication intervention? And now we're ready for application and putting it all together. Demonstrating an understanding of the core components of IPC and using frameworks supported by research provide the leverage required to advance assistive technology skills and products in a world where technology continues to improve access to expanded social circles, the wider community, and new environments. So bottom line, it provides a way to adhere to ethical practices and maintain current standards of practice, aka best practices. So this is an evidence-based field, and it uses a scientific method and research to come up with supports and solutions. An interprofessional team is grounded in those core competencies that we discussed, those 4 core competency areas. The basic principles of the tri-focus framework and participation model are evidence-based, and they are applicable to general assistive technology intervention. You can take those frameworks and we can work through those strategies so that when we go out to a company like Microsoft who's trying to develop more and more accessible features, that we can say, hey, these are some of the things that we've identified as barriers. These are the things that we need to see. You can bring these forward with an interprofessional team And together you can discuss and plan around that using a grounded scientific framework. These evidence-based strategies can be used to build new skills, guide decisions on new assistive technologies and systems, and establish advocacy for current improvement in future AT designs. And so again, here we're going to put more of these steps together, okay? So you can see, I'm going to highlight it here, that we have the participation model, right? And now this is something that we've seen, we're aware of, we know the steps through it. The next step with this is to take it and apply to that tri-focus framework. So one of the ways in which we can do this is as we're going through, we're assessing needs and participation barriers, again using opportunity barriers and access barriers. And then we develop our plan for today and tomorrow. And now here is another step where we can bring in a lot of those tri-focus strategies, right? So if we go over and we make this connection, we make this leap over to this model, the tri-focus model, here's where we start to increase our opportunities. We're building our networks and identifying partners. These are all part of the strategies that we're planning based on the barriers that we've identified. You're adding opportunities into those routines, right? We're modifying the environment. We're either taking things away from it or we're adding things to it. And this does include the digital environment. We're supporting learning and we're augmenting input. As we go through this, we're teaching every step of the way, or we're learning. So you could be in either one of those seats. As somebody on your interprofessional team could be teaching you a new skill, and in turn, you could be teaching somebody else that skill. This next slide is going to break down those 5 primary strategies of the tri-focus framework and show you practical ways that they can apply to everyday situations. So remember, it's a feedback loop too. As you're going through this, there's constant feedback going into the loop. We're applying, we're reevaluating, and reassessing needs. So the first primary strategy, enhancing partner sensitivity. First step with that is we go back to the interprofessional collaborative team part, where who are your partners? What is your team? What companies or vendors involved? Do we have the community involved? Are there folks that we feel comfortable going out to in the community? And a key part of this, and I almost can't emphasize that enough, are politicians, right? So what policies are out there? Do we have politicians that we know that we can go to? It includes things like leadership training, okay? There's free ones out there. The AUCD and ASHA, they have free cultural sensitivity trainings. AUCD has self-awareness modules. There's other leadership trainings out there too, and there are some of those listed in the resources handout. A great way to do this is to go to conferences and learning opportunities. So conferences like Closing the Gap. This is where you can go to learn new skills, to increase your sensitivity, your knowledge, and your skills. The next step, utilizing routines. So what do you do every day? Do you eat breakfast? Do you brush your teeth? Do you go for a run? Where in your day can you implement, 5 minutes of a new strategy? So one of those things is, can you set up an email for updates and alerts that you can check in the morning, maybe at 1 o'clock? Can you use 5 minutes at the start or end of an appointment to implement those interprofessional strategies? So communication with other colleagues. So if you're seeing a client, for example, could you both talk about that, send out a message together? Utilizing routines is a great way to make sure that you stay connected, share, and amplify your voice. Even things like a regular group chat, so a hangout with a Google Hangout or something, and a quick message just to check in with other people. For increasing opportunities, so remember that we've already assessed our the opportunity barriers. So many companies nowadays are emphasizing accessibility and disability rights, and it's so important to take advantage of those resources. This is where we really do want to build that community engagement. So maybe find a store, maybe a library, local library. I'm huge on that, where you can go in and you can practice assistive technology skills there. There's grassroots campaigns. So for example, the Wisconsin Assistive Technology Regional Networks in Wisconsin. It was a grassroots campaign started basically to reach out and teach more people about assistive technology and build a community of learners. For modifying the environment, input matters. So think modifying the digital and technological environment. Resources for this include things like the World Wide Web Coalition, which is actually currently updating their accessibility guidelines. You could do, how can we modify Facebook? We'll talk more about that in a little bit too. And again, there's tons of resources for this included in the handouts. Augmenting input. So model how to complete these steps during therapy. Incorporate them into meeting therapy goals. Can you engage community partners? Are you using multimedia, multimodal instruction? So remembering I'm a kinesthetic learner. I like learning by doing. So what's going to be the best way to teach me something new? Are we using videos, animations, illustrations, text-to-speech? And give folks time to practice these new skills in a controlled manner. So to tie this together, I think it's important to also look at the history, especially in regards to technological advances. This article from 1999 from McNaughton, Buchelman, and Dowden, called Tools to Support International and Intercommunity Collaboration in AAC Research, I think had some great quotes. Recent developments in computer technology provide new opportunities for international and intercommunity collaboration. And we're seeing that today, and that's going to keep continuing. So how do we take advantage of that and leverage it to maximize our opportunities? History suggests that in the first stages of innovation, a new technology is adapted first to reproduce the old technology, but gradually experimentation produces separate but parallel knowledge cultures. How can we keep those knowledge cultures together? And how can we keep everybody progressing as our interprofessional team grows? The new technologies at least offer us the opportunity to select from a wider range of tools as we consider how best to reach our goals. And knowledge of those tools and figuring those out, we can pinpoint down the right ones for each person that we work with or for yourself using Tri-Focus Framework and the participation model. And hopefully that companies will also take note of that as they're really trying to implement new things. And the quote here is one of my favorite quotes of all times. It's why sometimes I believed as many as 6 impossible things before breakfast. And that's from the White Queen in Through the Looking Glass. I think that's an important thing to keep in mind is we have a lot of impossible thoughts, and that's okay. But we need to keep reaching for them, and we can take these tools and keep moving towards that. In 1987, Dr. David E. Yoder said, "On the process of building more appropriate communicative behaviors for the person who has a communication disorder, we need to look carefully at the array of tools available." And that's what this presentation is doing. So we're looking systematically at tools available and plugging them into these different components. And the title of the article and the quote that he had in this one was, "Would you tell me please which way I ought to walk from here?" which is also from Alice in Alice in Wonderland. And I think that that's a great one too, because as we're sitting here trying to figure out which way to go, we need a system in place to justify which way we take. So now it's time to get to our fun business word, leverage. Moving on, maximum advantage. It's time to leverage. So leverage means when it's used as a noun, the power to influence a person or situation to achieve a particular outcome. The way that we will be using the word leverage is as a verb. So use something to maximum advantage. Our goal is increasing full participation across environments and activities of daily living by leveraging various platforms and resources to build skills, expand networks, and deepen connections. And remember that all these strategies are very interconnected. And it reminds me of the old song by Frank Sinatra, Love and Marriage. You can't have one without the other, right? And as we go through this, you're constantly going back into that feedback loop, just like you do with interprofessional collaboration. The next part of this presentation is going to heavily emphasize quotes from major tech companies and resources for how to actually leverage our scientific basis into transforming the future of assistive technology and accessibility. One of those resources, the American Speech Language Hearing Association, published a free ebook that you can get on their practice portal, and it discussed emerging approaches for interprofessional education. Educators are using team-based experiences, shared practica or observation activities, online discussions and activities, health mentor experiences that teach students the roles of other disciplines, allow for discussion of ethical and value-based principles. And so if this is what's starting to be taught in the schools, how can we apply this now and in the future into our tri-focus framework and participation model when selecting the right technologies? It's approaching 2021, and we have witnessed a sort of workplace renaissance regarding remote working. And things like self-driving cars, how is that going to fundamentally change our society now? So if we can get everyone out into the workforce, more people are employed, what is that going to look like? And on a very personal level, how have things changed for you in 2020? Have you been working remotely? The New York Times did a great article recently. It was called "When the World Shut Down, They Saw It Open." And these are some of the quotes from there. Accessibility is, in one sense, about having options to participate or not participate on your own time and in your own way. Virtual classrooms, cumbersome as they may be for parents and teachers, offer similar flexibility to students with disabilities who may benefit from assistive options such as captioning and malleable playback. But the window is still open to make accessibility permanent, ideally under the guidance of people with disabilities who used online tools out of necessity well before they became universal. I believe these are very powerful quotes, and the time is now to leverage all these different tools to keep pushing and advocating. Time-tested and reliable news outlets are jumping in, as mentioned. So the quotes on the previous slide were assembled from New York Times, and it was a request that they put out in July of 2020 to learn from individuals with disabilities regarding their experiences. I think that this is a great task and skill that can be incorporated by IAPC team members into their goals, and whether it is a person with a disability or a family member. And here is an embedded link that you can actually contact the New York Times because they're reaching out. They want folks to help shape their reporting on disability and accessibility in America. And here are some quotes which stood out to me while completing the free Accessibility Fundamentals course provided by Microsoft's Learning Center. So, nothing about us without us. Microsoft said, include people with disabilities from the beginning of every planning process. It's a thought at the beginning, it's not an afterthought. This mantra reinforces the role of people without disabilities as strong allies and partners who share the role towards inclusivity and accessibility. To be inclusive means to embrace disability from the very beginning, from the earliest planning stages of a product to its launch, to its latest updates. Accessibility should always be built in rather than bolted on. And we all have a role to play in that. In speaking out, letting companies know what's working and what's not working. And those are things that we can identify using the participation model, tri-focus framework, and we can identify roles and responsibilities of our interprofessional team members to support that mission. Here's a scenario to think about. You're working with a client who needs to access Zoom for remote work meetings. This client lives remotely or rurally and has never used the internet. Based on assistive technology assessment, an eye gaze camera setup for a computer would work best. The interprofessional team is going to meet to assess the barriers. They're going to make a plan for today and tomorrow, and they're going to provide instruction. The important considerations in this are the learner. So if somebody's never used the internet before, and now we're trying to throw an eye gaze camera and a computer into the mix, what's that going to look like? Is the learner going to be ready for that? If not, are there other ways that they can still participate in these work meetings? The interaction partners, so that would be the office mates, the colleagues at this point. What does that look like on their end? Are they ready for that? Have they learned the skills? Is that something that we need to reach out and teach to these folks? And the environment. So that is including the digital environment here. What does that online internet landscape, what's that going to look like for this individual? Is that something that the workplace will provide? So back at slide 25 or 27, I asked, what does communication look like nowadays, and how and to whom do you and members on your interprofessional team communicate? How frequently do we need to engage unfamiliar communication partners? Well, in today's world, we tweet, we email, we text, we have telehealth, we teleconference, we don't much telephone. We Venmo, we communicate over video games, we yell at other drivers, we blog, we Facebook, we WhatsApp, we Instagram, we group chat on at least 5 different apps. We use digital post-its in our electronic health records, we have IEP software, and client relationship managers. That's a lot of different ways that we communicate. And they change very quickly. So we need to make sure that all these things in this constantly changing world are still getting that access and accessibility they need. And it's a tough job to keep track of these things, but that's why having that open communication with your interprofessional team is so important. So we know which one of these areas is going to be most important to somebody's quality of life. And how many folks nowadays schedule medical appointments via an online portal? Is that communication? Do companies know what that looks like? How do we integrate that into all these different platforms? To help answer those questions of how can we leverage these resources, here's a list of just some different ideas for that we can use to our maximum advantage. Things like university centers, corporations and companies, social media and communication platforms, professional websites and blogs, scientific research, professional organization, nonprofits, local and national, and most importantly, your interprofessional team. So if you're not able to do something, is another member of your team able to? Here's some more examples of how to leverage those evidence-based practices and technology to influence accessibility and assistive technology. Things like the WAVE tool, which checks website accessibility. So if you find a website that's not user-friendly, you can use this tool, analyze it, and let those folks know. Same with the Web Accessibility Initiative. Microsoft has a direct accessibility feedback forum, as does Google and Facebook. Things like Xbox Copilot, and trying to make gaming more accessible, which is a great way to teach new skills. Project Euphonia, where Google is trying to record different voices, especially folks with maybe a communication disorder, to help understand speech. There's a great campaign by the Association of University Centers on Disabilities, which is the I Vote Because, and I recommend you go do that. Leverage social media. It is an important tool. In fact, some companies even use this to make hiring selections, and there's a couple articles linked here about how to do that. Twitter and LinkedIn are excellent ways to connect directly with folks. Companies care about their public image, especially when it comes to issues like disability, advocacy, and accessibility. I've even received quick responses from companies like Southwest Airlines, through Twitter. Maybe they don't even have an email anymore, it's just Twitter. And I consider that the 3 Ps. It's the power of public perception. And these are tools that are at your advantage right now, that we can reach out, and you can, again, find a member of your interprofessional team to help with this. If you don't feel comfortable with it, or maybe you don't have an account, that's how you can reach out and let folks know. There's other supports. Always look to specific companies. There are so many great resources out there from them. The Communication Matrix, they have an online community of practice, which they described in 2019 as a place meant to bridge knowledge gaps among interprofessional team members. Local libraries and Chamber of Commerces are huge as well. So many great resources, even through your local library's website. The American Speech Language Hearing Association has an excellent interprofessional practice portal with tons of resources, including a quiz. It's a short 5-question quiz, and that's actually in the handouts with this. And just some tips for that. Continue to learn together with your team. Some ideas. Complete the same free classes or resources. So if you find a great free class, Microsoft's Accessibility Fundamentals course, everybody can complete that. It takes about 2.5 hours. Take a leadership skill inventory and discuss the results. So things like I talked about in the beginning. Plan a book club or an article club. If you find a great article, have everybody read it, break it down, talk about if it was an accessible article, and if there are strategies that you can implement from there. Create a resource library so that all your members can add to, especially folks who use AT and their families. So it's not just the speech language pathologist sharing with an occupational therapist, it's everybody able to access this resource. Moving forward, use your team to simultaneously think about what's next while continuing to support those current needs. And again, we've addressed those strategies within the TriFocus framework on how to do that. Keep learning, no matter what your role is on your interprofessional team. It's one of your ethical responsibilities on the team. Consider if we need to revise service delivery models. So are there other frameworks that will help us, guide us through this digital age? There are challenges, as with everything in life. So funding and money. So is that an opportunity barrier? Do folks have enough time incorporated? Is this something that you need to contact administrators about? And one organization, TASH.org, is a great one for disability rights. Another challenge, potential challenge, is competing organizations and competing professionals. You can minimize this, again, by showing that respect piece on your teams. But expertise is often at a premium, and a lot of times even organizations do need to compete for limited amounts of funding. There can be competing ideologies. Tricks with that are to stay centered and grounded in evidence-based practices, and as a mentor recently reminded me, that cooler heads will always prevail. Finally, the quote, "What would life be if we had no courage to attempt anything?" by Vincent van Gogh. So that's it for me. I thank you all for your time. I'm very grateful and humbled to be presenting on these topics. My hope is that you now have tools and resources in place to take this information and feel ready to begin applying it. Please contact me if you have any questions, ideas, or even just want to connect. And I hope that you all take care and stay healthy. So thank you.